Welcome to Movie and Beer, everybody. This is Dan bringing us in, and on this tonight's most wonderful, excellent episode, we have a couple of awesome friends and co-hosts with us.
Yeah, this is Aaron. I'm your rope and knot expert.
And this is Brian. I'm your war movie expert.
There's a lot of warring going on in this film. We watched The Woman King, which is a vehicle to express what happened in the African continent in the 1800s.
1829.
1829-ish. There's people coming in, taking slaves, and how they treated each other. And there's a lot going on in this film. Viola Davis was the lead, and General Naniska, I believe that's how you say the name.
Yes, it is.
Something like that.
She had an excellent portrayal.
She did. And we knew what we were going to watch ahead of time. So as always, we picked a couple of really good, I picked a couple of, I think, really good beers out. Couple, I guess, regional because they're not here in Portland. Fort George and Double Mountain. We got ourselves a Vienna Lager and an IPA. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. But really, ultimately, this was about trying to find something that would be appropriate for kind of a longer movie because this was a little bit longer. I kept looking. I was like, oh, it's still going. Oh, well, it's not the end yet. Here we go.
Well, and we have a couple ideas of why it was a little bit longer.
Yes, we're going to try not to plot spoil the hell out of this. But
right,
this is a movie that's still in the theater. We watched it and it was really excellent. It takes place. Dahomey is the name of the kingdom that the female African warriors. They protect the king. They protect their kingdom. They're facing a new threat, which is Europeans and people coming in taking slavers. They themselves, and this is kind of the controversy, is like this isn't an anti-slavery movie by any means because they themselves they talk about that in the film between the king and his court and the people that are in it. Like, well, we treat our own people who we've conquered as slaves,
right? Captives to be
right. We sell captives from our wars as slaves,
which was historically accurate.
Which is historically accurate. Unfortunately, this particular film, and this is a broad criticism of the film, the women warriors in the film free slaves and try to get away from slave taking,
right?
Which is ahistorical.
And I think we can acknowledge that's ahistorical, but I forgive this film for that, honestly. Like there's so many other things it does well.
I agree. I really appreciate the fact that it is exposing a wider audience to this group of women warriors, which did exist in Africa.
Yep.
And there aren't very many societies that have a woman warrior caste.
Yeah. Agreed. And I like that. I also like too that this, this film being so well done. I imagine it's doing well with theater receipts and kind of has an audience. I'm just glad that African stories are being accepted in this way, that they're being told, and because for me, my family background is very Scandinavian. There's lots of movies that talk about Scandinavian heritage and family. I'm glad that there's a kind of a colonial era African story told from that perspective.
Told from the African's perspective.
The homie's perspective.
And not the European perspective. Not
like the Portuguese slavers or not, the man who would be king or, like there's lots of those colonial movies, but, or, even Lawrence of Arabia. But like this is kind of a breath of fresh air. Because it much more centered in what the experience was to have your homeland kind of cracked open and exposed that way, or the exploitation that was happening.
This kingdom actually existed between 1600 and 1904, like late 1900s, or early 1900s, late 18th or 19th century, as it would be called. The kingdom did have farming and trade, and they traded with a port on the coast. And the king had to make a decision. Do I continue being farmers and trading goods and services, or do I continue to trade those that we've conquered? And that's really the gist of it. I mean, so yes, the film does have slavery as an underlying thing, like are people commodities? And that's how it was really
what an unrelatable and foreign question, Dan, of like, do I focus on the GDP and economic development of my country or the quality, the standard of living of the people who live
my
there?
Citizens?
Right.
Exactly.
That would have nothing to do with today's political environment.
Sure. What a unique and novel question.
So historically, as it's told about 3 or 4 times throughout the film, there are siblings, a brother and a sister, who were the gods who oversaw this part of Africa, and that's who they believe in as their god and goddess, and they equally rule. And they had a term for it, and the king at the end bestowed the lead female warrior general as the woman king, and he even says that. So the film does have...
And they are co-rulers.
Correct.
And this is based on their religious perspective.
Yep.
And it's very fascinating that explains why there is a woman warrior caste. This is a society which values female empowerment.
Well, how interesting! Yeah, there's this like masculine and feminine divinity, and it's not the monotheism that like I was raised with anyway, but like, what does that do for gender relations? What does that do for a society? And like, and we did see there was also like a masculine warrior troop.
Yep.
But they were not the focus of this film at all.
No.
This was both an African story and a female empowerment story, I believe.
And as we said, a war story, too.
And a war story, too.
So 2 hour, 15 minutes. Not a lot of pre-credits. Some post-credit stuff. Well, not post-credit, but there's the credits. Took a little bit of time. We were like, is this still going? All right. It grossed worldwide almost $100 million. Cost about $50 million to make. So I think it's doing really well. I think it's being well received. Again, the people that have had issues with it, it was released back in mid-September. It's, I think, going to get some awards just simply because the visuals are outstanding. The costuming is outstanding.
Costumes are excellent.
The
choreography, the dances, and
the dancing, and all of the stuff that's portrayed.
I just love the fact that it's a story most people wouldn't go see, but it's got a wide breadth of appeal to a wide audience, I would say.
I would agree with that.
And the young female lead, Lashana Lynch.
Who plays Nawe?
Nawi. Let's just say younger version of the lead. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not trying to spoil anything, but you figure it out. It's there's
too late. You've already spoiled it.
Younger version of the lead.
Right.
She reflects in this young woman who's 19. She doesn't look like 19. She looks like she's like 12.
Well, I was going to say she looks younger, but I almost think that it's her movie. She's the main character.
Oh, she is, totally.
Like,
she is definitely the main character.
Right. This is her story.
So female empowerment. Now, is this kid appropriate? I'm going to ask that straight up instead of waiting until the end. Because so you have teenagers who see worse violence in this and worse language. There's no language. There's no foul language.
There's no language. There's no sex.
There's no sex. No nudity.
There's no drug.
No drugs.
Anything.
There's just a little bit of like, I'm going to chop you and you're going to fall down.
There's reference to rape.
Yeah.
There's that. And then there will be, I think, some appropriate conversations around like the legacy of race, at least in the United States where we're seeing this, but kind of the slave trade, more globally.
Yeah.
So there could be, I think, some more mature themes in that direction, but like certainly not. And there's violence too. There's battles and fights, and there's some blood.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's overly gory. It's not. This is not 300. This is
not at all. It doesn't glorify any of it. The violence. There's no squirting blood or anything. Right. It is rated PG-13, so it is appropriate for a younger quote unquote audience. Not necessarily elementary school age, but definitely if you want to show something that's culturally appropriate and will start your kids asking questions, and that's sort of the whole point.
You couldn't get an elementary kid to sit still for 2.5 hours.
I know.
I mean, there's plenty of action though. There's training scenes.
And there's action.
Like teenagers though, like they would I think get a lot out of this movie for sure.
They would. They'd be like, damn, I could do that, because it's really realistic in how they portray how battle is, and you get tired really fast. You're going to swing around a couple of times. And you're like, damn, I'm tired. I mean, Brian has experience swinging things around wearing armor or not as much armor.
Yeah. So absolutely, I've participated in broadsword and shield combat. And you get exhausted after about 5 minutes.
And most of their fight scenes didn't last that long.
No, pretty short. It was pretty quick.
Right.
Pretty short and to the point, or in the point, as it were.
But I do like this film has a value of sometimes like ingenuity and cleverness, working together and intelligence. Sometimes that's a superior thing to just, being more mighty, being bigger and stronger, having a larger army. There is kind of an underdog sort of...
they move slower.
Right. Well, they definitely valued the protagonist, the fact that she was clever.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that made up for some of her willingness to not follow orders.
Stubbornness.
The
We'll say
main,
stubbornness.
It's funny because it's like, oh, I need to start listening to the younger people who know what they're doing and can see and understand what they're doing. So there is some, I guess you'd say the general had to learn from the troops because she didn't understand. She's like, oh, it's just a gun, it fires. And it's like, no, gunpowder is a separate thing and it explodes if you spark it.
It
She's
has a
like,
value on its own.
it has a huge value on its own. And there's, I think, Native Americans here, I mean, I've read and seen a lot of movies and, there's stories about that, how to use something that's been provided to you that you've never thought of before. And it's like, hey, like how can we use this creatively? And I'm going to go to the rope.
Let's go to the rope.
The rope is the first and only weapon you need. And why is that?
Well, you can choke somebody, you can garrote somebody, you can hog tie somebody. It's so
You
so
can tie
versatile.
it to your weapon and bring your weapon back to you once you throw it at somebody.
So I had a problem with the rope scene in this film.
Yes, that's why I brought it up, Brian.
I know.
I'm trying to just lead it on.
They had a big scene where they said, okay, I'm going to give you your first weapon, and it's a rope. And then they went on to this training montage that probably went on 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, it wasn't a 15-minute training montage.
All right. It was a training montage.
Yeah.
But they never showed the use of the rope again.
Right.
Until someone used it in battle.
Which was now like legitimately an hour later in the movie.
Which was later in the movie. I think it would have been of value to show 10 seconds of someone learning how to effectively use that.
Right.
Like the light bulb going on over the main character's head. Oh, I've really been given a very valuable skill.
The I was wrong. I am learning from how I was wrong, and I'm gaining skills and a new perspective.
The Karate Kid.
Right. Yeah.
Wipe on, wipe off.
And so,
moment.
we're saying for our main character, she starts out very headstrong, very stubborn, and there is like sort of this tension of, yeah, she needs to learn to listen to expertise. She needs to learn that the general and these other more older
the lieutenants.
They know their. I was about to say something wrong. They know their stuff. They know their shit, and you need to listen to them because they've survived. And
right,
clearly,
they have veterancy on their.
Yes,
they've
absolutely.
survived the last two battles.
And as part of this story arc I was expecting is this young, headstrong, stubborn character is going to learn that they're not invincible. They don't have all the answers. That their experience and wisdom counts for something. And there's some of that, but there's also this. Sometimes wisdom has to listen to the youth too, and sometimes wisdom can get stuck and not be as creative as it needs to be. Can't think laterally, which it altered the whole course of events in one of the main conflicts of the film.
While we're talking about the main protagonist, I want to bring up my primary concern or criticism of the film.
Yes.
And that is, so we've got this young, headstrong girl who becomes a member of this warrior society because she refuses to marry an older man who's going to pay her father to marry her.
She says flat out she doesn't want a husband.
She doesn't want a husband. And when she talks back to him, he hits her. She says, I'm not going to marry a man who abuses me, who hits me.
Yeah.
So we've got this very strong... independent woman. She has her own agency, and then throughout the film, she becomes a love-besotted teenage girl, where they throw this Hollywood romance on top of her.
Oh, he was hot. He had washboard. He's like ripped.
No, he was cute, but the night she takes her blood oath, swearing her allegiance to her sisters in this warrior society, she sneaks off to go see this guy.
Instantly, reneges on part of it.
And it completely...
It's unnecessary.
Well, for one thing, it's unnecessary for a war film.
Yeah.
I mean, who's the love interest in Platoon? Who does John Wayne fall in love with in the Green Beret?
His own gun. No.
Yeah. This is my weapon. This is my gun. This
Happiness
is for killing.
is
This
a
is
warm
for
gun,
fun.
baby.
But Brian, your point is really well taken, and I think you're right.
It waters down her character arc
Way too much.
way too much. And it also extends this film
It does.
by 20 minutes.
It's a subplot, and who knows if it really needed to be there or not. I think that it lends to the
it serves
human-
a purpose in the last
Yes,
scene.
it allows her to be human. It allows her to make a choice. It allows the person she falls for to make a choice.
But I think she's human. I think
So-
she's compelling. I think you can identify with her enough without that love interest. Like it just feels overlaid on top of the rest of this perfectly
Well,
good story. That's
It's
already
Hollywood,
compelling
man.
enough.
You got to do it in Hollywood.
But
You gotta have
I
an love
feel
interest.
like in a feminine forward pro woman
She don't need no man.
story.
She don't need no man.
I mean,
Yeah.
She can
who's
use
Tom
that-
Hanks in love with in Saving Private Ryan?
I don't know.
Nobody.
Or we said that as the Great Escape. I remembered A Beautiful Swiss Woman. Then that might have just been something I dreamed up afterwards. But like,
know.
But
there's not the same thing in the Great Escape or these other great war movies. There's
Right.
not. There's, yeah.
So here's my point of view. My point of view is there was some considerable plot holes. Not just that.
Okay.
The special effects, I think, like the fire scenes and stuff. It was very practical in a lot of ways. But when they did use either overlaying a film and like, oh, we're standing in I'm like, okay, you're in the African outback and there's no mountains nearby, but there's no water and you can run there in a day. So that means it's like less than 10 miles. Must not be that far. Yeah, there's just some plot holes. And then the lead says the word sloth. I'm going to leave it at that.
okay,
If you know where
South American animal.
a South American animal does not exist in Africa in the 1800s. It should not.
1829.
And how would she know what the hell a sloth is?
The mythical sloth.
The
All
mythical
right, that's a
creature
writer not
called it-
doing his research.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here reading the IMDb goofy stuff, and it's just like, oh yeah, they should not have used
Was-
that word. They should have used a tortoise or something slow instead of a sloth.
Was somebody wearing a wristwatch in one of the fight scenes too?
Yes, there's some
Probably.
other continuity
I'm sure there
goofs.
are. Yeah.
I did notice
But I
that
digress.
there was a cage at one point very prominently displayed in the film where some characters were being detained, and it was a metal cage
was
in
very
one
metal.
scene, and then instantly it became a wooden cage just like a moment later, and I was like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
How did this cage change?
There's obviously some time gaps
Yeah.
which aren't explained that just happen. And it's storytelling, it's Hollywood. They're allowed to do that. But when there's huge continuity issues like that, I'm like, come on, man, you at least make a little effort. I mean, you're spending $50 million on this. Make a little effort.
But they did make an effort with the costumes. I thought the costuming was really, really good. I have no expertise with that part of Africa, certainly for that time period, but it all seemed believable. It all seemed like it was from natural materials that would be available, and then the coloring and the patterns seemed legitimate to me.
Yeah. I am by no means a weapons expert, but the swords, machetes, and spears that the African warriors used, they seemed legit.
Right.
They seemed patterned after African weapons I've seen.
And to even
So
then,
that
sorry, go
And
ahead.
That
it was
seems
really slow paced, though.
authentic.
I mean, there was
Yeah.
some authenticity to the costuming and the reality of where they were, but it was so 2.5 hours. How much could have been edited out?
The whole love story could have been edited out.
There's a
the
lot.
whole love story. There was another side plot
Couple of side
The shark
plots.
tooth side plot, like that.
that
shark
I
tooth,
don't want to spoil.
Right.
It would really spoil the film if I
Yeah.
talked about it. But that
That's like 20 minutes. Like,
was a thing that seemed like
Unnecessary.
Hollywood
So-
layering on top.
Ultimately, this is kind of revisionist history because we don't really know. It's all just handed down through storytelling, and there's not a lot of written, recounts of. And again, history is a perspective and not a reality. We're thinking about, how much truth is there to this, and does that matter? Does that defend or take away from the story? If it's like, wow, if I was a historian and I walked into this and I knew that most of this was completely just made up bullshit, would it matter? Is the acting good? Is the story good? Is this just a portrayal versus is this trying to be historical?
Yeah, I think you're asking, like, does it have entertainment value on its own aside from the truthiness of the events it portrays?
Yeah.
And I think, it does, but I think you do need to respect that this is a real time and a real place where real people had lived.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there will be people that now have some family connection or other connection to the time and events that are portrayed.
I was entertained by the film. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
I also I find there's a lot of value in exposing me and other people to this story that I don't feel has ever been told before.
So you haven't read any National Geographics when you were growing up?
Not about the
I'm
homie.
call my parents had a subscription to National Geographic, and I saw a lot of that.
But
I didn't see it in the movies. I didn't see it on TV. I just saw it in a magazine.
I mean, I would say it's a story about this warrior caste,
Yes.
which I had heard of in passing, but I didn't know a whole lot about it.
Yeah, even
Of the Dahomey warrior women.
even these kingdoms like Dahomey, Oyo, Benin, I was familiar with all of these kingdoms, but like I don't know anything about the culture. I don't know their traditional foods or
Right.
and even the weapons they were using.
I mean, hopefully there is some historical accuracy.
I hope so.
Because I'm now assuming, okay, I know more than I did before the film about these cultures, and maybe I don't. If it's Hollywood fabrication,
and that's
we
a
don't
lot
know.
of the reviews and things that I've been reading as we've been discussing is really centered around that. That's one of the bigger concerns people have is like, okay, this is a Hollywood film, a lot of money went into it, but is it meant to be a historical drama or is it just meant to be storytelling through this interaction of a young woman and her ability to make a choice to say, yes, I want to fight for my king and my kingdom, and I want to become powerful and make my own and make my own choices. And ultimately, the main protagonist, Viola Davis's character, allows her to do that because she's like, I was just like you. She sees herself, and we're going to leave it at that.
and
But
this younger version
Yes.
of a person. Yep.
anyways, wow, we've been talking for almost 25 minutes, and we haven't even talked about beer yet.
Well,
I bet they made beer in Dahomey.
there were two
probably
beers that we enjoyed with this
There
film.
were. So we know that fermentation and they had things, and there was a shot of a whiskey bottle, which they didn't say the name, but they did say it was whiskey, and I'm assuming that they got it from someone from Europe because,
Yeah, she said the only good things the European give us is this whiskey.
is a whiskey.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we did not drink whiskey during this.
Womp.
That's okay, though.
But
So-
it's not whiskey in a movie.
It's
movie and a beer.
So at this point in the podcast, we're going to start talking about this couple of beers that we had with this movie. And this movie that we are discussing is The Woman King. It's a fairly new release to when we're watching it. It's in the theaters still. It's a really interesting film. I would highly recommend it to anyone that is interested in the topic, can be easily entertained because I think we were all pretty entertained. It has a little slow burn. It's not necessarily super fast paced.
I didn't think it was that slow.
But my mind never wandered off. I
It didn't.
Of the three of us, I've seen it. This is my second viewing, and I was happy to see it again, and didn't get bored the second time either.
So and as mentioned before, we knew we were going to watch this, and I was seeking out beers, and I happened across the Fred Meyer out in the Hollywood district of Portland, and I was looking for one beer and couldn't find it because it's kind of a not year round, but they make it about halfway around the year, and I'm like, all right, fine, I can't find that, so I shifted gears and said, hey, let's go for something that has an animal on it, and then something that looks and feels old and is an older style and can really represent the 1800s. So the first thing we got is from Fort George, and this is a seasonal lager, a Vienna style lager called Iredale. So this is actually named after a shipwreck.
On the Oregon coast.
Yep, off the Oregon coast. So the can art itself is on the beach, which they had galleons, they had ships in a couple of scenes at the beginning and towards the end of the film. And this ship ran ashore at the mouth of the Columbia, right outside of Astoria.
And you can still see the iron superstructure of the ship on the coast.
Yes, you can. And so having seen pictures of what it looked like, and then after, I was like, wow, that looks very, very similar to what the ships were in the movie. And this happened, in the early 1900s, and the film takes place in the mid-early 1800s. So not that far afield. And it just felt like old school. And so Vienna-style lager has been around for a really long time as well. So this is like 4.7%, and this is a seasonal beer that they make. It's not year-round, and I would highly recommend if you can get a hold of this. This is a very smooth, dry, not hoppy at all. It just has a really nice malt finish, very clean. Brian, do you have any thoughts on this beer? Because I think you really liked it.
I did really like this beer. I thought it went well with the film. It had a little more flavor than some of the lighter beers we've tried.
But this is only 4.7%, so it is lighter. It's just more flavor forward.
It's more flavorful, yeah.
Yeah.
And it tasted a little more earthy to me, which felt appropriate wandering around in Africa.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy this quite a bit.
Nice. I would say that if you can seek this out or any other, I think the style goes really well. So Vienna Lagers or any kind of English mild, which is also going to have that tea-like kind of character and note, little dry. You know how tea can kind of dry the back of the mouth out. It's like, it's not necessarily super acidic, but it just kind of dries you out a little bit. And I think from an herbal standpoint, this does really well with that. I really, really like this beer. This is the first time I've actually had it. I picked it out based simply on the design on the can. I was like, oh, that looks like an old shipwreck.
Well, the Kingdom of Benin in the neighborhood, that whole area was known for metalworking and iron. Like the Benin bronzes were from that part of the world, and still some controversy of if England's going to return them to, and then who do they return them to? You know, but yeah,
really
metalworking is legitimately related.
Yeah, I would suggest, if you can't find this beer, find something else that's similar. That, like I said, an English mild or.
And what was the name of this beer again?
So this is Iredale, Iredale, which is named after the
Peter
Iredale, which is a four-masted bark, Barque, bark sailing vessel which ran ashore just west of Astoria at the mouth of the Columbia River in 1906. So you can still go see the wreckage if you are here in the Pacific Northwest and are out in Astoria in that region or area for a day or a weekend or whatever. Check it out. It is still there. You can go see it.
It's a fun day trip.
And the brewery is
Fort George, which is out of Astoria. And, we really love Fort George beers. They have Festival of the Dark Arts coming up in a couple months, and I'm going to go to that, and we're going to really have some good beer there. But I digress.
Next up
is Double Mountain Brewing, which is, for most of you probably know, based out of Hood River, Oregon. And Double Mountain, I think they're out of Hood River. So this has notes of tropical resin, tangerine, petrichlor. So it's like very earthy, evergreen. And it's a full beer. So this is
Hop Lion.
The Hop Lion IPA are 65 IBU, 6.7 ABV. Comes in bottles. I don't think they can this one. They do variations on it. I've seen fresh hop versions of this. It's just one of their standard beers. It is a very good, clean IPA, old school. It's not meant to be super resiny or like West Coast, Northwest super resin. It's not meant to be super funky or have a lot of, it's not a New England style. Some of the West Coast styles can be a little over aggressive with the hops, and this one is not. It does have a nice malt balance that helps support it. It does have some tropical dankness. I think it kind of dries out and has kind of more of an orange, like dry orange peel or pithiness or even orange oil on the back is what I get out of it. It's like orange. As you sit and drink it, you're just like, wow, it's just orangey.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, I don't like really hop beer, but this was okay. It wasn't too hoppy. I didn't feel it went as well with the film as the first beer, but to each his own.
Yeah, I think we would.
But it was enjoyable. It wasn't a bad beer. We've had bad beers.
We have. I think we could agree that, find a beer that you're going to like. This has a hoppy beer. I think both went okay with the movie. The second half of the movie had a little bit more action in it. You had the set of young, not necessarily young, but the set of women who were the recruits who were trying to join and prove themselves and and then went to battle. All of that happens in the second half of the movie. So you kind of build up to this third part of the film where you've got all this training going. You've been selected, then you've got your training, then you go to battle.
The women who've proved themselves are now part of the warrior cast.
Correct. Right.
And they've got a job to do.
They do.
They got to take that machine gun nest on the hill.
Some of them do it pretty well. Some of them don't. And I think these beers are reflective of that. One does it really well and the other, questionable.
It was okay.
I think for an IPA, it's not a bad beer.
It has
It's
different
pretty
skills.
It completely different skill sets, completely different profile.
It can't use that rope.
No. And how do you use that rope? You use that rope. You want to use it tied around your weapon so you can throw that machete at somebody.
There's 100 ways. There's 100 ways
There's
to use the rope.
100 ways to use the rope. They just didn't show them.
Yeah, they and I would agree, Brian. I wish they would have talked about it or shown it or been like, "Hey, I can figure out how to use this in a lot of ingenious ways."
Well,
instead of just
it kind of
on my
goes
belt."
to one of the secondary or tertiary subjects of the film, which was your thinking. It's the warrior who's important, not not the tool, not the weapon.
Correct. It's how you use it, not what it is.
Yeah, and your strength as a group as opposed to your individual strength.
Any other thoughts before we close this episode out?
No.
I'd say recommended. This was a fun
This was a
film.
thumbs up.
Yeah, a lot of fun to watch. I'd watch it, I think, a second time if the opportunity came up, and I hope our listeners, those that have the time, will give it a chance.
It's
and
well
enjoy
worth
it.
watching. It's a story you're not going to see very often,
Yeah.
except for the teenage besotted romance.
Yeah, that you see that everywhere, and that was just kind of a sideshow here. It's not.
It really is a sideshow. It's not part of the film, really.
Correct. I would say that, thumbs up. I think everybody's a thumbs up on this one.
Yes.
Find something. It's 2.5. So I was looking at the clock going, it's still going, because it felt like it lingered a little bit.
Find something a little lighter in terms of alcohol by volume, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Agreed. And there's plenty of things you can find to enjoy while you drink, while you're drinking, if you're going to drink,
A good
if
lager.
you've decided to.
Yeah, don't drink whiskey or
Yeah.
you're going to fall asleep about halfway
You
through.
will.
Then you have to watch a movie a second time just to figure out what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, or a third. You're like, did I watch this already? I can't remember if I watched it already. Anyway, thanks for listening and hanging out, everybody. And we really enjoy this opportunity to share our thoughts about this really kind of fun movie. We have some water in front of us. If you don't hydrate,
You might dehydrate.
yeah, don't do that.
Don't do
and remember, if you're going to watch this with your kids, be ready to explain some stuff to them because, again, this isn't necessarily an anti-slavery film, but it certainly does have that as a underlying subtext and a subplot. And hey, people make decisions on to support or not support it, and how does that impact them and their society and their culture back then?
This
It
can
happened.
start a conversation
It could,
for sure.
and that would be a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right.
So, and as always, the opinions expressed during the taping of this recording are those of the hosts. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Dan. We're going to go ahead and sign on out. And
Yeah, this is Aaron. Thanks for listening.
This is Brian. Thanks for listening. Bye.
take care, everybody.